Hello and welcome to Surveyor Says, the podcast from the National Society of Professional Surveyors. Each week, we bring you fascinating guests that are involved in the profession of surveying. My name is Tim Birch, and I'm the Executive Director for the National Society of Professional Surveyors and your host for the podcast. Subscribe to the podcast on most of your favorite streaming platforms, as well as our podcast host, Podbean. For more information about the podcast and NSPS, please visit our website, nsps.us.com. So, without further delay, here's our next episode of Surveyor Says, the NSPS Podcast. Hello and welcome to another episode of Surveyor Says. I'm your host, Tim Birch, and today, with all the stuff that's going on, this is the middle of January, and you would think that it would be calm, worried about football and other things. Unfortunately, we've got some serious news going on in Southern California with the wildfires, with the devastation. And unfortunately, we keep talking about this situation more and more throughout the last several years. Washington State, Oregon, much of California, a little bit of Nevada, and even New Mexico has had some of this stuff. Well, anyway, my guest today is Carl C. Baca, former director, former governor, were you an area director as well at one time?
I was an area director.
Yep. Area director for NSPS. So, Carl, tell us a little bit about who you are, where you are, what's your role in surveying, and then we'll jump into the whole situation that's going on with wildfires and monument preservation.
Okay. So I'm a licensed land surveyor in California and Nevada. I was licensed in Nevada in '87, California in '88. I've practiced equally over all those years in the two states. And currently I've been in Folsom, California, which is kind of north central California, right outside of Sacramento, for a little over 5 years now. And I work for a firm called R.E.Y. Engineers, and we're kind of a specialty survey firm that does a lot of transportation work, remote sensing work, and we have kind of become a little firm that does the difficult and challenging projects that other people don't seem to want to take on. So because of that, we've been involved in fire recovery efforts on some of the bigger fires. The Camp Fire, which obliterated the town of Paradise, we were the first people in. I think there was probably still things smoldering on the ground when we first got there, and we were there for about 4 years, mostly working on infrastructure recovery. So that requires a lot of trying to figure out where easements used to be, and that requires trying to find enough monuments to nail down where the streets and easements were. Paradise was so obliterated that finding streets was difficult. A lot of Paradise was gravel roads, and after the fires were done, it was tough to even spot them. So in the 4 years that we were in Paradise, we recovered 5,500 monuments. California state law requires that we either file a record of survey or file individual corner records for those monuments. We chose to file a record of survey. So we basically took the GIS line work, put all the monuments in there, and then the last 20 pages of that survey, it was a 64 sheet map. The last 20 pages was a coordinate list and with the character of the monument. And the reason we did that is because monuments don't really get destroyed in wildfires. They get destroyed in the cleanup after the wildfire. The contractors and FEMA and various local agencies, when they go in to clean these places up, they're pretty indiscreet, with the use of loaders and blades and dozers, and so if you can get those monuments tied in right after a fire, you should, and we really need to, for the good of property rights and for the good of future surveys, because those monuments will probably then subsequently be destroyed. And I think that's what they faced recently in Lahaina as well.
Right.
So, that was that whole town was obliterated, and they started from scratch. And in that particular case, they didn't have record surveys. Hawaii doesn't have a recording law, so they didn't have record surveys to rely upon in their rebuilding efforts. So significant challenge there.
Wow.
But in addition to the campfire in the town of Paradise, we also did, there was a Caldor fire in El Dorado County, and the town of Grizzly Flat was obliterated. And in that particular case, the county called us based on what we had done in Butte County with the campfire and asked us if we would get in there right away and get as many monuments as possible. And we ended up getting chased off after about 2 weeks by FEMA because they determined it was not really safe to be operating there. But in that meantime, we got over 500 monuments. We filed a record of survey for Butte County and perpetuated those monuments as well. And we're currently working on one from, again, in Butte County, the North Complex fire, and it's going to be well over 1,000 monuments. And the point is here that capturing those monuments is kind of separate from the rebuild. It's like pre-rebuild. It's trying to account for as many monuments, which will have a big impact on property rights. Trying to account for those monuments before the rebuild starts. When the rebuild starts, there will be contracts let out. Private people will be hiring surveyors. Agencies will be hiring surveyors. But by then, the damage is done. And so, the the point is to get in there early and get those monuments tied. So part of my tub thumping over the last couple of years is that there is no plan that I know of at the state level, at the local level, at the federal level for paying for post-disaster surveys. There's no FEMA doesn't have a policy, specific to surveys. None of the counties here in California do. And there's a group of us here that are hoping that we can, prevail on the local agencies to start thinking about that and preventative planning, I guess, is where we want to go with this.
Well, exactly. Well, I tell you what, the first question I have, and just hearing you talking about going into Paradise and finding 5,500 monuments, and like I said, before they're disturbed, before the cleaning takes place, all of the debris is cleaned. I gotta ask, what kind of hazard situation are you in? I mean, are you literally there in hazmat suits? I mean, the carcinogenic material, from the burn and all. I mean, what kind of conditions? I mean, it's got to be almost surreal.
Yeah, yeah. That's absolutely right. And FEMA generally makes the call on that, or else in our case, California has the Office of Emergency Services that can make the call. They can tell you whether hazmat suits are required or just recommended, are respirators or masks required or recommended. With respect to our crews, we're not going to let them go into an unsafe area, without wearing the proper protective equipment. And so in Paradise, they wore masks and respirators. I think that was the first really big fire, and I don't think anybody had really given any thought to hazmat suits. So they were in there in their clothes and their boots, and we did have a policy that before they drove home from Paradise every night, that they'd try and clean off their boots and sweep off their pants so that they weren't sitting in the cab of a truck with air blowing on that dust. But as you can imagine, cars and houses, when they burn down, all that electrical equipment burns down, and the dust and the ash that's on the ground is just highly toxic with metals and things like that. And one complication that I never spent much time thinking about until recently is electric cars. When a Tesla burns down,
Oh, yes.
or a vehicle like that, and a lithium battery is burned down. There's a lot of metals and things that are going to be in that ash. So, and then in addition to that, trees will partially burn down, and then they become dangerous to work around, and limbs, are hanging off of trees and they could fall. And there's power lines that may or may not be live. They probably aren't, but you just never know. And there's all kinds of ground hazards that are covered by the ash. In Paradise, there were places where there were 4 or 5 inches of ash on the ground. And so you had to really be careful where you placed your feet. You might trip over a piece of barbed wire and fall on the wreckage of a car. So
Well, that was going to be another question. Yeah, and you just said it about the depth of the ash that it's I mean, like it's like walking through a big pile of snow, and but yet there could be all of this very hazardous debris underneath, and obviously you got to have some pretty hefty boots to have not have sharp things coming up through them and injecting into one's body. It's hard enough to survey sometimes, but then to be encumbered by all of this safety equipment and a respirator, that's got to be a challenge.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely is. And and the other thing about that is that when you get there, it's kind of like a moonscape, and in any context that you would, as a surveyor, expect to see when you're doing, boundary retracement is just gone. So even finding the edge of the road can be difficult, but like projecting fences and hedges and things like that that might define a property line and place to look for a corner, that stuff's obliterated. So
Wow.
so it can be pretty challenging to even get started to find that first corner that helps you, get going after that.
Yeah, wow. Well, I guess part of the retracement process, I'm curious to hear your side of it. Is yes, you've got to get out there as soon as possible before the cleanup crews get going and tearing stuff up. But I mean, is this handing paper plats to crews and saying, "Here, just find all the stuff," or are you able to try to pre-calc some stuff to where you could try to do some basically recon by layout, or is this all, or maybe a combination of all of the above?
It's kind of all of the above. We had guys in the office every day, doing the records research and printing out like 11 by 17 copies of all the record maps that we could get our hands on, and then we were also trying to compute them into base maps. And they're record maps. They're based on any number of different, basis of bearings and coordinates and everything. So stitching them all together to make like a block of, 15 parcels at a time, and then and then give it to the crew. And we had in the case of Paradise, we were working with a big utility company, and their surveyors established a control network out there throughout the whole city. And so we did all our surveys using their control. And so the problem with their control was none of the record maps were on that basis of control. And so we had to figure out how to approximate it at first. And then as time goes by and you accumulate more and more data, then it starts falling into place better. And the more searches you do, the tighter your search coordinates can become. But yeah, and it's an ongoing process. And so we, in the case of Paradise, we were out there so soon that we really, for the first few weeks, the crews were mostly working off paper copies and trying to get themselves oriented in the field for their searches. On subsequent projects, we've taken the time up front to compute it ahead of time as much as possible and build a set of search coordinates and put it in a data collector file for the guys. And
Nice. Well, it was like for Paradise, for instance. I mean, was most of this subdivision work? I mean, was it a lot in blocks, or I guess how much did you have to recreate, as far as numbers of meets and bounds parcels? I mean, was there any kind of idea of proportion to what you were trying to retrace?
Paradise was like a worst case scenario poster child.
Oh, of
It was
course.
it was an entire town, very large, small in population, 25,000-ish, but large in terms of geographic area, and a hodgepodge of deeded parcels and five acre parcel maps
Yep.
for every parcel that was the subject of a map, there would be the next 3 or 4 parcels up and down the street would not be, and stitching all of that together was kind of a challenge. In the areas, there were a few subdivision maps, and in that particular case, that all generally snaps together pretty well. And in those cases, if you can find like 2 monuments in the subdivision, you can find all the rest of the remaining ones pretty readily.
Good.
Um,
Good.
and in Berry Creek is interesting because, and I say this only partially jokingly, but there's an awful lot of farms out there that are growing marginally legal substances, and they are generally the larger parcels and not subject to surveys. And but they need their electricity restored and their gas lines restored and their
Yep.
roadways restored. And so we got to be out there surveying and that stuff. And so those, when we did the calculation work to get the crews going on that, it was a lot more challenging because the surveys were fewer and farther apart. But it was sectionalized land, and we had really good luck finding section corners.
Oh, well,
And
good, good.
part of the reason for that, I think, is because the section corners, generally speaking, weren't where the roads and the property lines were, and so there was no reason for the cleanup crews to doze down the section lines.
Paradise itself, I mean, what kind of terrain are we talking? I mean, is there a lot of relief across the town?
Foothill of the Sierras, so of the Sierra
Okay.
Mountains. There's a very deep ravine on the west side of town, like basically a canyon. It's all volcanic rock, so it's a lot of vertical faces and stuff like that. And then the town is built on a big slope, so the high side of town is several hundred feet higher than the low side of town. And yeah, it wasn't flat in the least. In
Okay.
some that case, some of the Palisades fire, that I've seen on TV is very similar to that. Maybe the terrain is a little more rough, but approximately the same.
Wow. Well, my next question, I guess, comes back around to the records research, and I mean, it just, boots on the ground, but getting it going and getting, not to, I guess, talk disparagingly about, the records department's recorder's office, but were they very, very helpful in getting you all the records you needed very quickly to be able to get this effort started?
Well, we've been pretty lucky so far in that, the Paradise and North Complex were two big fires that were in Butte County, and Butte County's records are all basically online. All of their record maps and assessors maps are available online. A little more difficult with deeds, but we had a couple of title company services that could provide deeds. So most of the research could be done at your desk, and so that made things
Oh,
quite a bit
good,
faster
good,
and more efficient.
good. So okay, so you were able to get that information pretty quickly, get it out to the field. I mean, at any given time, how many people were out here? I mean, boots on the ground doing this work.
In Paradise, we had four field crews, so between 8 to 12 people in Paradise every day for close to 3 years.
Oh my goodness! Wow. Now, I guess part of my next question is, like you said, and it's FEMA. Is it FEMA? Is it the state? Is it whomever? Uh, I guess who was your client? Who was putting this effort? I mean, authorizing you to put this effort together.
Well, this is the big issue here. In the case of Paradise, we were lucky. Paradise was lucky in a way. But we were working for PG&E, and of
Okay.
course, as you know, PG&E is essentially admitted to having their facilities started that fire. And so they were motivated by trying to do the best job they could on behalf of the citizenry of Paradise. And so they literally spared no expense. And it may not be that way in other fires. Paradise was
Right.
was a good example of that. In Southern California, there's Southern Cal Edison, which is a big power company, and then there's LADWP, the Department of Water and Power, that carries a huge amount of political clout. And and if they decide that they want to be a proactive part of the recovery and rebuilding efforts down there, they can get an awful lot done. And I would certainly encourage them to do that.
Okay. Well, I guess that helps explain the differentiation here. Like you said, you have a party that had facilities that were going to obviously contributed to the situation, and they stepped up. But yeah, in Southern California, that's going to be a whole different story. And, I guess let's talk about Hawaii for a second. That's the same situation there. I mean, they've been struggling to try to get people to help basically retrace and put things back, and they haven't had the funds to do it.
Yeah, Lahaina is a very interesting case because, first of all, there are not very many surveyors in Maui, so they don't have a big pool of surveyors to draw from. And and then they don't have recording laws, so the town of Lahaina kind of grew organically, but it didn't grow by a series of parcel maps and subdivision maps. You can say that for sure. And then the obliteration and the cleanup was pretty profound. So they have a lot of strikes against them. One thing that did happen, and there's an article coming out next month in the American Surveyor that I put together. There was a lending institution that specialized in Maui of helping out native Hawaiians, and they were able to go out and find a grant for $3 million. And so they set up a fund to allow for essentially no cost surveys for the people that are rebuilding in Lahaina. And it comes with some ground rules. You can't just keep sending a crew out to survey a single parcel. You'll burn through that $3 million pretty quickly. So they're kind of saving them up. So if you want to get your property resurveyed, you and your neighbors got to get together, and when they have 10 people, 10 landowners in an area, then they'll dispatch a surveyor, and he'll take care of all of those at a time. And the program seems to be working really well. I just can't say enough about those guys, and I'll wait. You can read about it in the American Surveyor next month. But that was a fantastic effort. And the only thing about it that I could say that's negative is they shouldn't have had to do it in the first place. It should have been either FEMA money or state of Hawaii money or something. There should have been funding set aside for such an event. We just, as a society, haven't put any effort into that sort of thought before.
Yeah, I guess that raises a good point that we've talked about kind of ad nauseum here. With our legislative consultants and such, we've got all of these functions within FEMA for hurricanes and tornadoes and other natural disasters, flooding and such, but it just doesn't seem like they're willing to step up to that degree to want to help put things back together. I guess in putting things back together, I want to go back to Paradise for a second. You said you did this 60-some page survey of all of these things. I guess. Yes, this area of town the town burns down. The subdivisions don't go away. The legal descriptions don't go away. But how does one kind of pick up the pieces? How does a parcel owner, landowner there, how do they move forward with information from your survey, or what's the next steps to rebuilding?
The town of Paradise, and probably in conjunction with Butte County and possibly some others, put together a website. It's like Rebuilding Paradise. And so there's this website, and in that website, any building permits that have been issued, any building permits that have been applied for, any surveys that have been done are all different data sets. And it's basically a GIS. And so if the time has come for you to finally rebuild your house on your parcel, you can go to that website and see, who else on your street has done a similar thing. And then if you click on that, it will tell you what surveyor did the work. And so with their contact information. And so they can easily, in Paradise, find a surveyor who has worked in their neighborhood. And so I think that was a really good idea. And then those surveyors have, they have the record of survey that we did that they can rely upon, and plus, all the existing record maps as well. And I do want to go back to that record of survey for a minute and explain a point.
Yes, please.
A really important point, and that's that we did not do a boundary survey of the town of Paradise. We did a monument recovery survey. So we identified those monuments, what their character is, whether it's an iron pipe or a rebar with a cap or whatever. And let me tell you that whether you use plastic caps or aluminum caps on your rebar, they don't survive a fire either way.
Neither survived.
Might want to think about another alternative. But anyway, we did not make any value judgments on what the monument might represent. Is it your
Sure.
property corner? That's for a boundary survey. We were just saying, we found this monument, here it is, here's the coordinates, and you can use it. And if it's gone, you can put it back in that same place. So, and I think that's an important point to make as we go forward. If other people were going to adopt this sort of strategy, sometimes the thought that, geez, we can't do a boundary survey of half of Los Angeles. Well, no one's asking you to.
Right.
Save the monuments.
Exactly. Well, I guess, a couple of wrap up questions here is, I guess going forward, what can we do to help minimize these situations? Or is this something that we're going to have to deal with? I mean, I'm not sure how we modify human behavior when it comes to monumenting property corners. But bottom line is, I mean, the fires, I guess until we reduce the opportunities of the fires, that's going to be one thing. But I guess is the bigger hurdle right now is just how do we fix it once it's happened?
That's the reality right now, but I think that there are some movements. First of all, every state should have some sort of monument preservation, law, legislation. I saw Pat Beeler drove one through in Washington last year that they have monument preservation now as part of Washington statute. And of course, California does and Nevada does. And so that's a start. But even that is sometimes a little bit short-sighted because, excuse me, monument preservation is generally kind of keyed to construction. I think when people think normally
Right.
about monument preservation, they're thinking, well, they're going to come in and they're going to turn this 2-lane road into a 4-lane highway, and we're going to lose all these right-of-way monuments. So we've got to have a law that accounts for that. So that's fine, but that's only half the story. What about a fire and a cleanup? So I would urge anybody who's anticipating, monument preservation legislation to consider post-disaster recovery as an important component in that. So,
Well, then,
so I think monument preservation, that's number one. I think every state should have it and it should be enforced. And then number two is some sort of a mechanism for funding that's specific to surveying. FEMA certainly doesn't have it, and they don't have any rules that say you can't use the money for surveying, but you can only use the money for what FEMA says you can use the money for. So unless you get the incident commander on site on that project to say, yes, you can spend this money on this, then it doesn't count.
Oh, exactly. So I guess that's what I think I'm hearing is a little bit of a call to action. We need to get our fellow practitioners we need some legislation to move forward. We need some ears to our legislators perked up that FEMA has to find a way to step this up. They've got funding in place and mechanisms in place to be able to help rebuild and help rectify bad natural disasters. But we've got, Governor Newsom saying this is probably going to be the worst natural disaster in the history of the country, possibly, and I don't doubt it. But how do we? Yeah, this one is happening, but how do we make sure that coming out of it is right? And I like your point that FEMA, until they're told what they need to spend that money on, we're kind of hung up getting that done.
Yeah. You can, it's kind of up to the local, right now, it's up to the local agency to have an interaction with FEMA, when FEMA gets on site to start administering the cleanup efforts. It's up to the local agency to have enough foresight to say, any rebuild is going to start with surveying, and so we need to get, money set aside for surveying. Not all local agencies have that enough awareness to recognize that, and the people that recognize that in our neck of the woods, in a public agency, the county surveyor and the county engineer, they'll have that foresight, they'll know, but that isn't usually who FEMA recovery goes through. It goes through some other department, may not be very well connected, and may not realize that surveying is needed.
Definitely needed. Well, Carl, I appreciate your time. You got any final thoughts, any final words of wisdom on where the surveyor lies in all of this situation? What more from your perspective should we be doing?
Well, I think, first of all, belong to your state organization, which then allows you to belong to the national organization. Be vocal, be active, pay attention to these things. And if you have a relationship or the ability to have a relationship with a local agency, a county surveyor, whoever, reach out to them and have that discussion. How is your agency set up to deal with a disaster of any kind, whether it's a fire, a flood, whatever, and what about surveying afterwards? And those are easy discussions to have, and not painful if it's not in the aftermath of a disaster, so pick up the phone.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, because it's not like, after it's all said and done, they can just call in the National Guard and the National Guard will come through and survey it because they're on the clock doing whatever. No, this is a highly specialized situation that has to be dealt with, and we are the profession to do it. So, no, thank you. You're exactly right. We've got to stand up for ourselves and speak up, and let those elected officials know what needs to be done to help make sure this goes the right way in times of tragedy. It really is a tragedy. And unfortunately, I'm going to have to say that if you go to the NSPS website, we do have a link to our foundation. Please consider making a donation for the disaster relief fund. And as unfortunately as we keep saying, that donation you make, that may be someday that you need it to do it yourself, whether it be a natural disaster of some sort or other ailments and such. So consider making a donation today. Carl, thank you very much for joining me. Thank you for your work in Paradise and staying on top of this, and just being an advocate for getting the right thing done.
All right. Well, thanks, Tim, and have a great day. And let's hope that this LA disaster is the last one for a while and not just the next one in line.
Yep, exactly. Well, that'll wrap it up for us here on Surveyor Says. Hit that subscribe button where you listen, and we'll talk to you soon. Thanks. You've been listening to Surveyor Says, the NSPS podcast, brought to you by the National Society of Professional Surveyors. If you have any questions about today's episode or any other topic, please email us at info@nsps.us.com, as we are here to help. Subscribe to the podcast on most of your favorite streaming platforms, as well as our podcast host, Podbean. For more information about the podcast and NSPS, please visit our website, nsps.us.com. And remember, it's a great day to be a surveyor.